Greetings, my name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, licensed presenters, the Core New Core, my patrons, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor or student. Just two things on my list today. Not much to say about one other than the euphoria one feels when one gets to sell one's art. So title one is MMP Reformer Picture Book. And I showed you once before, the very first one that I got, printed at FedEx, came this way, which is how I wanted it. And, oh, there we go. I've struggled for a way to show what this is. It's the MMP Reformer Picture Book 2020 coming up. And so that's like the fifth time I've ever taken this one out of the bag. I mistakenly, sorry for all the noise, I mistakenly had one printed at a distance before one was ready to pay for it, so had them send it back to me, and I got this, FedEx, right, my address, and what's inside it is another one of those. Now what's exciting to me is I got paid for an order and went into FedEx, had it printed out, went down the counter to another register and sent it, and will more than likely be in a box like this. And under my recommendation, spent the money to have it come unbound, so it's not bound. It's and to me, wallpaper comes to mind right away, as does copyright infringement. But in whatever path of karma you choose to participate in, to be able to send a printout of images that have been on the web for well over a dozen years and represent a standard of its own, to have that print out in print and to someone that says they're interested in it, and no matter how it's received, before I know how it's received, I'm just so happy to have been able to participate in taking what exists out there on the web and bringing a picture book of it into paper and ink. If you're interested, the last time I did this, it was give me your email address and I send you a bill via PayPal and you do whatever it takes to pay the bill, and when that bill gets paid, I send you the picture book. Or picture books. If you want bulk pricing, ask about that too. Number two, the long stretches on the Reformer. And the reason I say MMP long stretches is because for the thousands of ways to look at the long stretches and what they are or what order they're in or what consisted of, all of that infinite variety. Let me just focus on what exists on my website at michaelmillerpilates.com. Let me just come from the MMP POV. And the long stretches are the long stretch, the down stretch, the up stretch, the up-down combo, the elephant, and the arabesques, and then long back. Arabesque meaning ball, flat foot, and ball on block. We can discuss that in a minute. But that's the sequence of long stretches on. This is half of the full reformer, and long stretches, long stretch, down stretch, up, down combo, elephant, arabesque, and long back. In MMP, the long stretch is about doing this. Okay? Maybe this way. So if Cornu went this way and the foot bar was at this end of the reformer, then your ears show. So in the long stretch, it's 5 points on a line. In MMP, that's because that's the way Joe does it in film and picture. Now I know you can get further away from center, reaching for 6 points on a line, but to try that as an extension of classical work makes sense when you can accomplish the classical work and achieve what you get from 5 points on a line in the long stretch. Meaning that the end point of tension at the metatarsals, here, making dorsiflexion at the ankle, makes such an end point of tension through the rest of the body that you have to be really, really well engaged through 5 points to even begin to thinking to taking it to 6. And that even if you can take it to 6 points, see, this is Pilates for you, to the extent that you can make an engagement that allows you to go deeper towards center rather than straining at end range. It fulfills the goal of uniform engagement, uniform distribution of your load. So, here's a question for you. In MMP, is straight considered flexion or extension? In MMP, we come from flexion, we come out of flexion, and in coming out of flexion, we're extending out of the flexion, but we're in flexion until we hit straight. And to me, straight as just a arbitrary point of view, but a choice of distinction, is that straight is an extension, because it's the first time in coming out, in extending out of flexion, that you cease to be in flexion by virtue of being straight. And then going more in that direction is a continuation of extension. So in MMP, straight is an extension. what's so great about being human beings and being able to make multiple points of tension that interact with one another is that we can make tension like this, and here we are seeking to hold the strength of that line while we are under load in spring tension that can go from slim to none. The trick in Pilates is to master spring tension, to find the focus of maintaining the line under the loading you go through in the range of movement. And your head has a place to be in that, because your head participates in the distribution of core new tension throughout the body. And in the sense literally that the head participated, that rotation around the ears is part of the tension that gives you the feeling of the alignment, of the stretch. So the next exercise, the down stretch, is what movement pattern? Flexion, extension, side bending, rotation, or torsion? So the down stretch is more extension, right? Is extension beyond just straight into, well, from 5 points on a straight line to primarily 3 points on a smooth curve in extension. These 3 points on a smooth curve in extension. And that in the extension, it's literally, like, see, once you hit vertical, ideally vertical, there you are able to create tension that is extension. And so the 3 points, well, all of your points all of the time in their engagement are seeking, by the nature of the engagement, elongation, seeking, expressing might be a better thing. Just the worm reaching out for more. And the method of the engagement, the method of the tension is between end points. That's just MMP. Looking at the biology and how it accomplishes the physics. So the long stretch is extension where it's like this. Now you go into bigger extension, and yet still trying to do this along the curve. Seeking the shape of the catenary, whether you get it to it or not, because in the physics of the catenary is the most even distribution of load, the weight of the body. And it's my point of view, that the St. Louis Arch is built in a catenary because of the shape of the curve. And that the human body in its aspirations to make tension and to align itself not only recognizes the alignment of 3 points on a straight line, but also 3 points on a smooth curve, especially if that curve approximates approximates the shape of the catenary because of its load-bearing characteristics. That's my reasoning for that point of view. So the down stretch is so much of not giving away, the tension that is a part of the engagement you're seeking. In my head, a dialogue goes off. Nobody wants to admit this. Nobody even is interested in this. And yet, I'm here to point it out while I can. And that's why a live recording is nice, and a recording is even live is nice, and a recording is even better. Hopefully it will resonate for longer. So, the upstretch, what movement pattern is that? Well, that's a good question. It's all flexion, right? Because the spine, see my pictures, buy my picture book, look on the web, they're free. The upstretch is all about flexion. It's all about flexion. And if the reformer is at this end, and the head and shoulders come down to the feet, here's my feet, then the carriage is in, and from the carriage being in, the body rounds back and reaches its hips back as far as it can without going flat. If you go flat, you use the advantage of the shape of flexion. And so you get as far back as you can in your flexion before the legs go out and take the carriage away from at ease, meaning into tension. The body, like in what you just got ready for in the long stretch, comes forward, except there's flexion at the head of it to come in, and then the spine rounds up into the hips, reaching back without losing the flexion before the femurs articulate off of the pelvis that's held in the position to support the flexion. Comes forward like a wave toward the reformer as the reformer closes. And then like the head, because the head is curled, the head gets to a point where it has to start ascending in the curvature in order not to get thrown off or to find a bad line through the wrist. But in order to stay on top of it, it's this delicious undulation of a curve from a tight curve that comes up and away from itself and opens up in the front of it and accentuates in the back of it without ever going flat. For me, one of the hardest to do, one of the hardest to teach, and one that looks so beautiful when it's taught or when it's expressed by a performer with such control. And a sense of the undulation, here this might be better, hips, all of the hips, and forward this comes, well, this goes up and reaches back, and then the legs go out to straight, except for the upper body and a curvature and a flexion. The interplay and the control and distinguishing between alignment and flexion and the degree of flexion, the degree of the bend, and controlling how the bend moves through and where the tension is created. Now the up-down combo is on my list, but it's really not, I don't think, in any of the original work. And since having it on my list, the up-down combo, that I don't do the other because it distracts from the expression of the original sequence, which means it goes from the upstretch to the elephant, And the up-down combo adds in extension. Oh, it begs for extension. I know that. I love that. But in going from the upstretch to the elephant is up to you. And personally, for a long time, I know the up-down is there, and I could make use of it if I wanted to, but I'm more focused on going from the upstretch to elephant. Because, why? Because that elephant, now, this is your head and this is your hips. Now at the elephant, you're maintaining the tension and articulating femurs off of flexion that's as far away as it can get from one another, hips, shoulders, and ears. You hold yourself away. Your hips, shoulders, and ears are engaged in core tension and making a lengthening of your spine as a result of that. And by staying in flexion, enjoy the privileges of that tension. And can use elephant to go deeply into where? Into the hips. You're setting yourself up, and the elephant, to develop your grip, to go really deep and tighter and more controlled into your effort to be able to grip at your hips as close to the axis of that grip as possible, because that's where you're strongest, and that's what gives you the most control. Now, the arabesques are totally distorted now into a crease at the hip and a huge extension of the upper body. Where in the progression of MMP, or the way I would point out the deal is, that you go from the elephant holding flexion from your shoulders to your ears, and that the arabesque is meant to be an additional challenge to holding that flexion. Not completely giving away, making a huge crease at the hip and going into massive extension. It misses, to me, the point of the difficulty of from your hip maintaining flexion in one direction while you're trying to lift your leg in extension in the other. The ball of foot first before doing flat foot, which seems contradictory to moving out away from center, is to acknowledge that in learning this, the tight Achilles tendons and being tight can be tough to do an exercise like that flat-footed. So being somewhat up in your heel allows for more tightness in your gastroc and soleus and so forth. In MMP, in the arabesques, the challenge is to be arabesque and not give away flexion from hips to ears. Because you're after uniform engagement. And the reason you give away that is when you make that deep crease in the hip and go into massive extension, the hinge at the hip undermines the effort at uniform engagement. It's just the way it is. Then the long back stretch is different how? The biggest thing, the difference is to me right away is that you're turned over. What makes them all the same? That you're supporting weight through your wrist, right? So when you know what you're doing and somebody says that they're suffering from carpal tunnel, you know you're going to pick something else other than long stretches or achieve long stretches without putting the weight of their body on an issue at risk. So all the long stretches support load through the wrist unless modified. And all the long stretches are face down, except the last one, which is face up, which is consistent with the rest of the work, because you do control push-up front facing down in gravity, before you do control push-up, which is face up. You do leg pull front before you do leg pull. And that's just, you may think it's labels, but in the order of what's presented in the original work, that's there, that acknowledgement of doing that. And it's true here in the long stretches on the reformer. So in the starting position of the long stretch is 3 points on a straight line: your hips, shoulders, and ears. And this is in neutral, meaning that your hips are in neutral, and that the beginning of this, even though you're supported by your hands through your shoulders, the beginning of this exercise happens with the rotational delivery of the hips. It comes from the center out. It's a hip rotation that leads the way. And then it comes back with straight arms. Forgot about the part about bending your elbows to start. Pulling out of a tuck into neutral with straight arms. When the elbows bend, the 3 points on the straight line, ears, shoulders, and hips, are meant to be maintained. And the initiation is not a push out from the shoulders. You see it all the time. It happens at the hips. And somebody might say, but I'm initiating at my hips. And you just don't see it until it shows up in the shoulders. And I say, well, okay, if you say so. But usually what you see is what you see. A lot of ways, right? Movement. Martha Graham's dad. Movement never lies. So in the long back stretch, it's like, okay, I've shown you the upstretch, right? And I've done the elephant to go as deep as I can into that grip and to be reaching out of it at the same time. There's eloquent, deep, delicious engagement into deepening your ability to engage your core. And to come up out of that into a long back stretch is showing off that you know how to make this tension, you know how to engage it from the hips, and let the whole engagement from the hips take whatever support it needs through the shoulders and the arms. It's driven by hip rotation, not shoulder engagement. And it goes down first and goes out because that's closest to the center before you make the loading occur. And then once you're able to do that, you start with straight arms and make the curl and go out further away from center to come back into vertical. And so the long stretches are this lovely statement of 5 points on a line. And then more than not, 3 points on a smooth curve in extension, the down stretch. And then the up stretch is going into an up stretch that rolls through its shape in an undulation of flexion that varies by degree. Into the elephant, where you've taken the flexibility you've arranged and then figured out how far away you can be in your reach away from center by the way you engage ears, shoulders, and hips. And then from that, articulate at the femurs off of the pelvis. The up stretch. It's a beautiful exercise. In a way, it's a physical demonstration of the understanding of the way your body makes tension and how it aligns itself in space, and also how it fluidly distributes itself in space. So I end with value and thinking of what it's like to actually have a complete copy of the reformer pictures that have been on the web for a long time. And understanding that, like it or not, know it or not, you can look at the order of Joe's exercises on the mat and the reformer and see a consistent application of uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. Life can't live forever. Read between the lines, see behind the curtain, connect the dots. Order your copy of the Reformer picture book and evaluate points of view. To me, MMP is like a view from atop the totem pole in Monument Valley. But you have to direct your thinking. Geist,